But the reason that I chose wallpaper is it's become a way of turning my two-dimensional work into a sculptural piece where it's created a space for these visions to crawl over and populate, creating that environment in which then other work and other people can come and be part of that same space. The faces actually first started cropping up in my work after a visit to an aquarium with my 4-year-old boy, and there was a moment of looking at all of the fish in the aquarium and seeing the reflected faces of a large crowd of people looking at the fish and the fish looking at the people, and it was this crazy jumble of colours and faces, and that image has stuck with me, this multiplicity of faces that have been distorted where the actual identity of the faces isn't really important. It's the variability in those faces that I find fascinating. Interestingly, I find that because my work is noisy, it can actually amplify a different aspect of the original idea, or it can grade against it in an interesting way, or it can harmonise with it. And that's why I see it as a democratic art form, because that's what I'm looking for, is this actual mediation of all these forms arriving at a new feeling. Running a studio from home, particularly during the COVID lockdown, has been, well, I mean, for most artists would probably say it's not particularly different. I mean, you're used to long hours in the studio working on your own, except when you have small children and all of a sudden it's actually a much busier space than it would ordinarily be. You're not spending the time quietly in your studio with your own thoughts, you're spending them with toys and games and kids as well, and it's a joyful challenge, but it's definitely a challenge. The wallpaper I've been playing with, the idea is really more conceptual than physical, as a sculptor for outlining and describing a space, more than just as a 2D work on a wall. And beyond that, in the sense that it is wallpaper, it's a background to be applied to a space and then decorated over the top of. In that sense, I see it working like an installation. These crazy faces that refuse to be background, they're like kids laughing in a lecture theatre while someone's trying to say something profound. They're refusing to let the space be dominated by someone else, but they're not actually imposing themselves as like the priority in that space. I like a volcano. It's an attention-grabbing piece of geology. It really lends itself to metaphor and analogy, but for me, that's not really important. It doesn't need that. It's enough in itself as just a big dumb firework, and I use it differently in different places, but essentially that's what it is for me. It's part of my mob, and that's what the faces, essentially they're mob, they're hecklers, they're bystanders, they're passers-by, they're witnesses, they're all of these faces crowding around the other works in a room, really reinforcing that sort of noisy sense of a visual democracy. Knowing what I'm planning on doing is quite important to me. I often have quite a clear vision of what I'm trying to achieve. The application of these faces to various surfaces and attempting to use them in other ways to see how I can change the way an item might feel or be perceived by layering it with my motif happens a lot before I get stuck into the work. So arriving at these wallpapers isn't haphazard. It actually, even though it has to be done in a fairly spontaneous way and I'm not planning each face as I draw it, the overall scheme and theme that I'm aiming for has been worked out in advance, because I have quite a clear idea of how I want the space to feel when I'm finished. Whether the wallpaper is the art itself or a backdrop is actually the real crux of my project, because I'm interested in this sort of view of art where it's both things at once, and there's no space that isn't filled with some art form. Even if it's full of people that have dressed themselves, everybody has composed their look and composed the way they want to appear. And so for my art to flow behind other people's work to be on top of it, and it to be part of this sort of polyvalent art form where everybody is part of it, and it just creates this horror vacui, and that's what my wallpaper is attempting to do, is to create a really dense version of that, so that you become quite aware of the fact that the art is everywhere, that it's crawling over the walls, it's everywhere. And it's just to make that drive that point home, that actually the art isn't just the thing on the wall, it's around you and it's on the people that are in the space as well.